Hey guys, so the other day I sat down to write out my video ideas for February and March, and I asked you guys on Instagram what type of videos you want to see. So I do have a lot of fun videos coming, including my declutter series for 2021, a lot of videos about drugstore makeup, some get ready with me's. So thank you guys so much for your video suggestions. One person suggested doing a video on discontinued makeup products I would like to see come back, and I thought it was so much fun. So as I was thinking through all of the products, I had so many. So I think I might do a part 2, but for today's video, I thought I would just focus on eyeshadow palettes because there are so many good eyeshadow palettes that were either limited edition or were discontinued over the past few years that I think brands should bring back, or just products that I loved. So that's what we're talking about in today's video. Let me know in the comments below because I am so curious. Is there one eyeshadow palette that you missed out on that you wish you could get your hands on? Like you just want brands to bring it back so you can grab it? Or is there an eyeshadow palette in your collection that you love and you use all the time, but it's limited edition or discontinued? So once it expires or you declutter it, you won't be able to get your hands on. So that's why you're kind of hesitating. Let me know. I have a ton to share in today's video. So let's start with Urban Decay. So I feel like Urban Decay kind of saves their best eyeshadow formulas and colors for their limited edition palettes. And in the past, they've done a lot of gorgeous holiday palettes that were limited edition that I just wish they would either bring back and make part of their permanent line or kind of use as inspiration for some future palettes. So the first one is the Urban Decay Heavy Metals palette. I totally forgot about this palette until I sat down to film today's video, and I loved this palette. It was one of my favorites. Now it is a completely shimmer palette, and a few of these are, so I feel like there is a tendency for brands to do all shimmer palettes as limited edition palettes because I know a lot of people don't want to purchase fully shimmer palettes. If you guys know me, you know that I love my shimmer shadows, so I'm honestly all for an all shimmer palette. I feel like at this point I have a lot of mattes in my collection, but I know a lot of people just won't purchase a palette if it doesn't have matte shadows, so I think that's why a lot of brands tend to use those as their limited edition palettes. So anyway, this palette came with two different sides. One side was like a warm tone shimmer side, and the other side was like cooler and colorful, and I thought the colors were so gorgeous. The only thing about this palette that I did not love was the packaging. It was really cool looking. It had like this outer case and you slide the palette inside, but in the center of the palette was a really large mirror. It looked really cool, but it was just a little bit difficult to use, and I felt like the palette was so large and bulky, and whenever I went to reach for it, it was just a little bit of a hassle. So I wish Urban Decay would bring that back and repackage it to be a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit more sleek. Maybe they could do like one warm tone shimmer palette and one cooler toned colorful shimmer palette, because I thought the formula was really good. The concept was a lot of fun. The packaging, I think, was just what threw a lot of people off. So that is one palette that I would love to see reinvented for the future, and it's just one that I miss having. Another Urban Decay holiday palette that I loved was the Urban Decay Elements palette, and this one isn't super old, so there's probably a chance a lot of you guys still have this. I would still have it in my collection if I didn't declutter it because of the packaging. I thought the formula was so good. It was one of Urban Decay's best palettes in terms of formula because the shadows weren't super powdery. They were pretty intense but easy to work with. The palette did contain mainly shimmer shadows with a few mattes, but I loved the color story. I loved the concept. The theme was really fun, but it came in this really large circular palette with just like small eyeshadows inside. So even though it was really beautiful to look at, it wasn't super practical to store because I like to keep my palettes in one drawer. I do have a little bit of a bigger eyeshadow palette collection, but even still, if the palette doesn't fit in my drawer, I have to declutter it to make room for what I have. And that one just took up a lot of space. It was very large and bulky, and when I went to use it, it just wasn't comfortable. I just prefer something a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to use. So I really enjoy that palette. I would love for them to bring it back and maybe do smaller packaging, something a little bit more minimalistic. I thought the theme was really fun, but even if they didn't bring that palette back, I would love to see them just kind of reinvent that formula in a new palette because the formula was just a little bit different than some of their others, and I really enjoyed it. So Urban Decay recently announced their Naked Wild West palette, which is a naked palette with a few pops of color. I personally think it's a lot of fun. I know some people aren't really into it, or they're kind of over the naked line, but a lot of people said it actually reminded them of the Urban Decay Beached palette, and I forgot about this one, but it is one that I really enjoyed. I thought, again, the formula was really good, and Urban Decay kind of switches up their formula from time to time, but the metallics in that formula were really vibrant, super intense. It didn't have a lot of matte shadows, which again, I feel like maybe that's why they ended up discontinuing it, or I think maybe it was meant to be a fully limited edition collection anyway. But that palette came out when like warm toned neutrals with pops of blue were a thing, and I feel like maybe they're making a comeback because with Urban Decay's new Naked Wild West, they kind of took inspiration from that color story. Their new Naked palette is maybe a little bit more toned down and not as vibrant, and it doesn't have as many shimmer shadows in it, but I kind of miss the Beach palette. I wish I didn't declutter that one because now I kind of miss it and I want it back. So that is one that I would love to see again, but I don't think they'll bring that one back because now they have the new Naked Wild West palette. So as we all know, Colourpop does release products and then discontinue them fairly often. They have done that with a ton of products over the years, and I'm sure a lot of eyeshadow palettes. I feel like their eyeshadow palettes usually last a little bit longer on the website than other products, but if there's like one Colourpop palette that you missed out on that you wish you could get, let me know in the comments below, because I feel like there are eyeshadow palettes that I can't even remember because they do release so many products. But the number one eyeshadow palette I wish they still had available is one that I actually still have in my collection, but I wish other people would be able to try it because I love it so much, and it is the Colourpop Golden State of Mind palette. They did this as a collaboration with Sephora for the holidays. If you guys are new to Colourpop, you might not know this, but Colourpop had like a limited edition collection available at Sephora. I think it was back in 2017, and I think they were kind of testing the waters to see, or Sephora was testing the waters to see if their consumers would purchase Colourpop, and I remember the collection was really pretty. It was fun, very sparkly, but this was before Colourpop did like their pressed glitters. So they did an all shimmer palette, and I do love shimmers, and I thought it was the perfect accent palette. Now again, I know that all shimmer palettes aren't for everyone, but that palette was nice because it had a couple of different textures. So you had, you know, satins, it had some foiled metallics, some regular metallics, and I still have it in my collection. I don't use it a whole lot at this point because Colourpop has released other palettes I reach for, but I just thought that was such a fun option, and I would love to see them do kind of like an updated version without pressed glitters. I kind of just miss like the older Colourpop palettes that had mattes and shimmers, and not like mattes with shimmer mixed in or pressed glitters or even the Super Shocks. I just like the original formula. So that was a great accent palette that I loved. I remember they also did like a holiday palette, maybe at Ulta as well, or just on their website, that had a lot of shimmers that was a little bit darker. That was really pretty too. I think a lot of people are going to agree with me when I say that I wish Colourpop would bring back the Good Sport palette, or I just wish it wasn't discontinued in the first place. That was one of their more unique color stories. There were a lot of really vibrant, colorful tones in there. There was a super pretty green, some deeper purples, and when I used that palette, I got a lot of interesting, unique looks that I wouldn't get out of other Colourpop palettes or just other palettes in general. Colourpop has a mix of colorful palettes and neutral palettes on their website, but that was definitely one of like their most interesting color combinations. The shadows were super intense, really rich and vibrant, and I think there were maybe like one or two duochromes in there as well. So whenever I used that palette, I just got a really vibrant, colorful look, and it was just fun to play with. I think it was something a little bit different, but they did discontinue it. So I would love to see them bring that one back, or maybe just kind of use that as inspiration for future palettes. They don't all have to be, you know, very neutral or very monochromatic. You can kind of throw in different colors that work together, and they can still be a lot of fun. So this palette and collection isn't super old. It actually came out during the holiday season for 2019, but it was discontinued pretty quickly. I think it was always meant to be a limited edition collection, and that is the Mel Cosmetics Amor Eterno collection. They did release two different palettes as part of that collection, Vida and Muerte. I wish they would bring them both back, but specifically Muerte. That's the one that I have in my collection. So I obviously don't need them to bring it back for me because I do own it and I really enjoy it, but I know a lot of people missed out on that collection, and it's just one of the prettiest collections I've seen as a whole. I love the fact that Mel Cosmetics does not shy away from color or unique color stories or just interesting combinations, and I think that one was out of stock, or went out of stock pretty quickly. I remember the Vita palette was available a little bit longer. That one's more of like a bright, colorful rainbow palette, but I personally love Muerte. I think that was actually my very first Melt palette, and since then I've tried two others, and that one's still like the very best in terms of quality. So it would be amazing for them to bring back that collection because I know a lot of people missed out on it, and I just think that it's so gorgeous. Just everything about it. The marketing photos, the actual colors of the palette, the actual quality. It's one of the best collections that I've seen in a long time. So I really enjoy it, and it would be fun to have it available again. So Anastasia Beverly Hills was releasing eyeshadow palettes like crazy for a little while, and they've kind of taken a step back. They haven't released as many, but I do feel like a lot of their eyeshadow palette releases over the past few years were limited edition or they were discontinued, and I feel like they discontinued some of their best eyeshadow palettes. This year during the holiday season, or I guess last year, 2020, they did bring back 2 of them. So kind of like as a bonus mention, I had always wanted Anastasia Beverly Hills to bring back the Jackie Aina palette because that one is so vibrant, so gorgeous. That's like their best palette, hands down, in terms of formula. The shadows are so rich and intense, but they're so blendable and easy to work with. And Jackie did an amazing job with the color story. You can just do so much with it. So I remember talking about that in like my best palettes of 2019 because that was my #1 palette of 2019. And I think at that time or like shortly after it was discontinued, and I just kept saying I wish they would bring it back. So it was really cool they brought it back for the holiday season. I think it's still available on the Anastasia Beverly Hills website. So I'll link it below, but again, it won't be around forever. I think they should just make that part of their permanent line because it is so good. The other palette that a lot of people wanted them to bring back that they actually did bring back for the holiday season, again, was the Sultry palette. This is just like a very beautiful neutral palette. And I remember when they first released it, I think a lot of people were like, oh, another neutral palette. But sometimes neutral palettes are just a necessity. A lot of people just wear neutrals every single day, and that palette just makes neutrals a little bit more fun. There are so many gorgeous shimmers in that palette. The matte shadows are blendable, easy to work with. And again, I think it's still available on Ulta's website, so I'll link it below. But I wish they would just make them part of their permanent line. Those are 2 of their better palettes in my opinion. So it just goes to show brands can bring back limited edition palettes if there is enough demand for them. Another palette I want ABH to bring back is the Subculture palette. So I did purchase this palette when it was released, and remember how there was so much drama surrounding that release? Remember when that was like the biggest drama in the beauty community, how powdery that palette was? And it's funny because that was such a polarizing palette. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people said you just have to know how to work with the formula, and other people just couldn't get it to work for them. So I don't know if in the end, anyone ever figured out if there were just inconsistencies with the formula or if it came down to personal preference. I feel like since that palette was released, my makeup preferences have changed, and I actually like powdery eyeshadows because they do blend a little bit better. And so I feel like maybe I would be able to get it to work for me. At the time when I tried it, I felt like my eyeshadow always looked very patchy, but I do feel like maybe my makeup skills have improved a little bit, and I just think the color story is so gorgeous. Back then, it probably wasn't a color story that I would have reached for very often, but I feel like I can do something a little bit more colorful and unique these days that I wasn't really wanting to do back then. So I kind of wish that palette was available again, and I wish I could try it out and see if my opinions would be different than they were when I first got it. I'm sure I could probably dupe that with eyeshadow palettes in my collection, so maybe I'll try to kind of create my own version of Subculture and play around with the color combination, but that is one I kind of miss, even though it was such a polarizing palette. If you guys purchased that palette, did you love it? Did you hate it? At the time, I really hated it, but I feel like now at this point in 2021, I might actually like it, so I wish it was still available to purchase. So I don't think I realized that Juvia's Place actually discontinued their Tribe palette until fairly recently. I talked about it in a random video because it has such an interesting color combination, and then I went to look for it and it is no longer available. So I think that one has been discontinued. I do own that palette in my collection, so again, this isn't a palette that I need for them to bring back so I can buy it, but I just think it was such a unique color story. It was so different than any other palette that I've ever seen, so I would love for them to bring it back and make it available for someone who just wants something a little bit different. There were lime greens, oranges, 3 really interesting duochromes. Sometimes when I use that palette, I can be a little bit intimidated and I don't know which direction to go in, but I feel like that was a palette that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And Juvia's Place, I feel like, is moving in a little bit more of a monochromatic direction. They've done like those smaller 6-pan palettes that are really well curated, but something that they do that I love is kind of throw a bunch of different colors in one palette, and I think that can really help you be a little bit more creative than you might be with like a very monochromatic palette. So Tarte and Too Faced are two brands that I don't really purchase from a whole lot these days. I just feel like their eyeshadow palettes and formulas haven't really pulled me in a long time. I definitely won't say I'll never purchase from them again because maybe they'll release a palette that I really just feel like I have to have. But there are some older eyeshadow palettes that I kind of miss from the brands and that I would love to see them either bring back or kind of update and do something very similar. And again, just kind of use as inspiration for future releases. So from Tarte, I loved their Make Believe in Yourself eyeshadow palette. I feel like that was one of the palettes that I used to rave about nonstop on my channel. And again, it was a fully shimmer palette except for one random matte shadow, which I think they kind of put in there so you could use as a transition or in your crease, but I didn't really use that one a whole lot. I did use the rest of the shimmer shadows. And I kind of wonder at this point, if I still had that in my collection, would I still reach for it? Because I feel like shimmer shadows have come a long way and a lot of brands have released really beautiful, intense, rich, vibrant formulas. So I don't know if I just have like really fond memories of that palette or if it was actually as good as I remember it to be. But I just remember using that one to complete all of my eye looks. I would always go in with any one of the shadows and place it all over the lid, and it just looked really pretty, shimmery, sparkly. It was more of a pastel palette, and at the time I was wearing a lot of lighter eye looks, so that was something I enjoyed having in my collection. But I just think Tarte, they feel like they're stuck in a rut, and I would love to see them kind of just do something a little bit more creative, a little bit more fun. Maybe they could do an all shimmer palette, but something a little bit more vibrant or something jewel toned. I think that would be gorgeous. So I just kind of miss those like round circular palettes where they didn't have as many options and maybe it was a little bit more fun than their more like traditional matte neutral palettes. If I'm being honest, Tarte was really never my go-to brand for eyeshadow palettes, but that was one that I really enjoyed. It's a very similar case for me when it comes to Too Faced. They were really well known for their chocolate bar palettes because at the time when Urban Decay was doing their naked palettes, Too Faced was doing their chocolate bar palettes, not a lot of brands had like staple neutral palettes available, and it's been years at this point, so a lot of brands have been able to kind of perfect their own version of a neutral palette, and a lot of those palettes are better quality than the chocolate bar palettes. So I feel like, you know, since they're chocolate bar palettes, they haven't really had like a successful eyeshadow palette line or launch. What are they even known for at this point? I'm on Sephora's website and I just searched like Too Faced eyeshadow palettes. So they have their Sweet Peach palette. They do have this Born This Way palette, which I do think is a really nice option. But other than that, they have like those square palettes that they had years and years ago. They did update them a few years ago, but I forgot they've been doing these like mini 8-pan palettes and they release those pretty often. I did review some of them in a recent video and the formula was just so inconsistent. There were some shadows that were pretty and I was able to get like a complete look using them, but some that were just very lackluster, really underwhelming. So I just feel like Too Faced has kind of fallen behind. They haven't kept up and they haven't really created a really good eyeshadow formula in a while. So maybe that's why, but I did love the Too Faced Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar palette. I guess I don't know that I want them to bring it back, but I wish they would maybe kind of update them and bring them back, but maybe people are over them at this point. I guess I don't really know why I brought up Too Faced. Oh, there was one Too Faced eyeshadow palette that I loved. I loved the Life's a Festival eyeshadow palette, and I would love to see them do something like that again. I know that a lot of people weren't really into that one, and it was a little bit of an unpopular opinion on my part that I loved it so much, but I think that was like my very first experience with duochromes. It had maybe like 3 or 4 duochrome eyeshadows in it that looked so pretty and just completely transformed your look when you use them. Again, at this point, there are a lot of brands that do really fun duochromes. I know there are a lot of indie brands that do multi-chromes, so maybe Too Faced wouldn't be anyone's go-to brand for a duochrome palette, but I would love to see them kind of just experiment and do something really fun, a little bit different. I feel like they're just kind of like stuck in a rut. I do think one of the eyeshadows in one of the recent like tin palettes that I tried was a duochrome, but the formula wasn't good. I don't know. What do you want to see from Too Faced? Are you even into the brand anymore? I feel like it's not a brand that I really have my eye on these days. I do have fond memories of the chocolate bar palettes and the Life's a Festival palette. Those are 2 limited edition or discontinued palettes that I do miss, but I don't know that they really need to bring them back at this point. Okay, so those are all of the products I wanted to talk about in today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think I will do a part 2 where I talk about just like regular makeup products that I missed, not necessarily eyeshadow palettes, because there have been so many good limited edition products over the years. So anyway, thank you guys for watching today's video. video. I really appreciate it. If you guys like eyeshadow palette related videos, I have a ton of them on my channel, so I'll link them in the description box below if you want to check them out. But I'll see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye.